do want to complete this Hebrews tonight so we can move on to the next section. I promise I will not keep you much longer. So if you'll turn to Hebrews chapter 4. Hebrews chapter 4. Remember, we only have two more points in this little section of Hebrews that I need to cover before we can move on to the next one. And what this is going to do is it's going to take us to where Paul is going to take a pause in his talking about the superiority of Christ. He's going to come down to the end of his section here.
Turn your mic on?
Oh, sorry. Who'd you throw something at? Whoa, now you got it too hot. You threw it at my wife. I did too. Oh, all right. I tell you, whew, this church is special, man. Yeah, do what? Yeah, woke everybody up. That's it. Woke me up. That's for sure. All right, Hebrews chapter 4. Let's go to verse 14. We're going to read verse 14 through chapter 5, verse 10, and then we'll jump right into this. And I'm going to run through the other main points real briefly, just so we can have try to jog our memories real quickly about it, and then we'll hit the last 2 points and be done with this little section. But here, when we come to the end of number 10, verse number 10, you'll see where he's going to stop his thought. He's going to pause for a moment, and then he's going to cover what we say for a moment. But like a typical Baptist preacher, he's going to take the next chapter and a half and go into kind of encouraging the people, really encouraging them, warning them, and just kind of and telling them why they should hold on to the faith. And so let's read verse number 14 of chapter 4 and round to verse number 10 of chapter 5. It says, "Seeing then that we have a great high priest that is pressed into the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our profession. For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in a time of need. For every high priest taken from among men is ordained for men in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins, who can have compassion on the ignorant and on them that are without of the way, for that he himself also was compassed with infirmity. And by reason hereof he ought, as for the people, so also for himself, to offer for sin. And no man taketh this honor unto himself, but he that is called of God, as was Aaron. So also Christ glorified not himself to be made an high priest, but he that said unto him, Thou art my son, today have I begotten thee. As he hath also in another place, Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared. Though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation unto all them that obey him, called of God as a high priest after the order of Melchizedek." So we're looking at how all this became about was Jesus is superior to Aaron. That's what this section was about, and has carried on for quite a bit here, where he's talking about Jesus is superior to Aaron. He is superior to the high priest, the first high priest, Aaron. And so as we look through it, we got to see in verses 14 through 16 that he was superior in his title, that he is a high priest. He's the great high priest, not just a high priest, but he's the great high priest. And so we were able to see that gives him the superiority. And then we were able to see that when we got past that, it was because of his person, because of his position, because of his perfection. And then we came down to the second thing was, let me see if I can get to it. I got too many notes in here. Second thing is he was superior in his ordination. And we saw that in verse number 5:1 and then verses 4 through 6. And so we got to see his ordination. And so he was not ordained by men. like Aaron and any other priest that was continued down the line. He was not ordained. He's superior because of his ordination. He was put in that position differently, because if you look at it, his lineage, he doesn't even fall into the line of the priest of the Levitical code. He doesn't come from the Levites. He comes from the tribe of Judah, which is not a priestly tribe. And so, therefore, he does not fall into that lineage, and so, therefore, he could not have been ordained by man. It only could be ordained by God. And so we were able to see that. And then, and we saw it because his ordination was forever. He was forever after the order of Melchizedek. And so his ordination belongs to a different order that was Melchizedek. Now the rest of them, why was the Melchizedek order completely different from the Abraham, or from the Aaron covenant, or the Aaron priesthood? Because Melchizedek, he was the king of Salem, and he was not a, back then, even that was in Abraham's time. And so in Abraham's time, the priesthood hadn't even been established. And so he was of a completely different priesthood. But he was a priest. And he was a king also. And so that was, of course, we're looking at, some people say, and I can see it, and I think we can fall into it because of the way Paul writes for us here in Hebrews, is I believe that was a precursor to Christ. We were able to see a precursor to Christ there. And then we also see he is superior. So this is number 3, and this is where we're going to pick up here tonight. He is superior in the compassion that he shows. And he is superior in the compassion he shows. And we see this in verse number 2 and then verses 7 and 8. Okay, verse number 2 says, "Who can have compassion on the ignorant and on them that are out of the way, for that he himself also is compassed with infirmity." Continue this on verse number 3, and it says, "And by reason hereof he ought, as for the people, he also for himself to offer for sins." So we know that who is they talking about? They're talking about Old Testament priesthood. They're talking about the Old Testament priests. So that's the first thing that we see there. He's superior in the compassion he shows, and we must look at the Old Testament priesthood, okay? Because that is how they're telling us here in verse number 2. Every Old Testament high priest ministered to the people who were ignorant and they were wayward. They ministered to them on a continuous basis. God made no provision for high-handed, rebellious sins. He only offered up judgments. And so you had to have a way to atone for those judgments. And so that's where these Old Testament priests would come into. And so these provision was made for the sins committed through ignorance. They were committed sins through the weakness. And the high priest could identify with the sinners. Why? Because he was a sinner. The priest was no different than the other sinners, other than he just had to keep his life pretty spotless, especially the high priest. And so, but he could identify with them because he was a sinner. And then on the Day of Atonement, if he kept his life clean throughout the year, he'd go in, and you'd know if he didn't. You'd know if he truly committed sin, because he wouldn't come back out once he went in there. And so, so then we see a problem, the problem of the Old Testament priesthood. Okay? And you would think that one sinner would have compassion on another sinner. You would think that. That would be the normal thought, correct? That we'd have compassion. But that's not always true. You can just see a couple of the examples in the Old Testament. For one, we have Eli. I mean, you got Eli. What happened with him? He accused. Look at Eli's life. And you can tell right then that Eli was much of a failure. He couldn't rule his own house well. Okay? But Eli, what did he do when he looked at Hannah? He considered her to be drunk. Didn't he? He didn't have compassion on her. She was wailing because she wanted a son. Simply because she wanted a son, she was crying unto God. But he didn't have compassion on her. He called her to be drunk. And then how about David? David's life really shows up, doesn't it? And what did David do? When the prophet came to David and told him that whole long story, told him about how this man stole another person's lamb, and what did David say? He's guilty, kill him. He didn't have compassion on him either. When really it was David the whole time. It says, "Thou art the man." And so true compassion, though, comes from spirituality. It comes from being spiritual and having a clean heart. We can see that in Galatians 6:1. Where Paul is talking there, he says, "Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such and one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. And so that shows the compassion of those. So we struggle to help out other sinners really due to our own sinfulness. We're quick to judge others in all of our actions, right? But Jesus, being made perfect, he was perfect, and if anybody had an opportunity to judge anybody, it was Jesus. But Jesus was perfect, and being perfect, he had compassion on all those. He can meet all of our needs. So we see that there was a problem with the Old Testament. But then we have to look at the preparation of Jesus. What made him into being so compassionate? Okay, because God is he's vengeful. He's full of wrath, and man, he'll bring judgment upon all those. And you look at him; he's got anger in him. I mean, he wiped out an entire Egyptian army because they were traveling after his own people. I mean, God is a God of wrath. He's a God of anger, but he's also a God of compassion. But we see that more, and we can see it in the Old Testament, of course, and how he had compassion on his own people, and how he had compassion. He showed grace unto Adam, and he showed grace to Moses and to Noah. He showed grace to all those, but the true compassion is shown in Jesus Christ. And we can see that through his preparation. Verses 7 and 8, look with me, of chapter 5. It says, who in the days, all right, we're talking about Jesus now. He says, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him, that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared. Though he were a son, capital S, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. So we see Christ's preparations. His preparation came in the days of his flesh. While he was in the flesh, he was tempted in all points as like as we are, yet without sin. Okay? He felt what we feel. He knows our weaknesses. He knows our strength. He knows all those things. He is able to have compassion. He grew. He matured. He felt hunger. He felt thirst and weariness. He had no place to lay his head. He slept in a boat. He faced temptation and persecution. But Christ's preparation included also his experience of death, and we saw that in verse number 7. In verse number 7, it shows where he experiences that preparation for death. Gethsemane revealed the deepest throngs of Christ, in his deepest agony was seen, and his deepest burden was there in the Garden of Gethsemane. It says that he prayed so hard, he was so stressed in his body, he sweat great drops of blood. That was putting his body under such strenuous strain there that he actually sweated out those. And what was it when he looked into that cup and he said, "Let this cup pass from me"? What was he looking at? What was he seeing? He was seeing the separation of the Father. He was seeing his separation from the Father, and that burdened him. He did not want that. And so he prayed that all these things, he prayed that it would pass, and that he wouldn't have to deal with that. But he didn't pray to avoid death. Because he said, "Not my will, but thy will be done." So he didn't pray to avoid death. But he prayed to be saved out of death. He prayed to be saved out of death. That's resurrection. He prayed for his own resurrection. He prayed for the resurrection because in Luke 22:42 he says, "Not my will, but thy will be done," which shows submission, not resistance to the Father. It shows true submission to God. His request was heard. It was answered. God raised him from the dead on the third day, which we'll be celebrating on Sunday. God raised him up. So all this is falling into preparation. He lived as the God-man by faith in the Father's will. This allowed him to identify with us in every way. So he knows how we are and how we true. But then our priest ability to help us. So we have to look at our priest ability and how he's able to help us. Because other priests, even me as a pastor, I can only go but so far to help you. I can only do but so much to help you. But we have a high priest that has direct access to the throne room of grace, who has direct access to the Father. We don't have to go through a man wearing a skirt, a dress, sitting in a confessional booth. We don't have to go to him. We got one that we got direct access. We have the mediator, amen, and we can go to him like we did tonight. And so our priest ability to help us we see that no matter our trials, Jesus understands our needs. He's able to strengthen. He's able to sympathize with us. He's able to give us what we need. Sometimes, I wrote this down. I saw this in a commentary I was reading. I think it was by Moeller. He said this: sometimes God allows our own suffering to make us better able to help others. And we've seen that true in our ministry and what we've had to go through. It's made us more able to help others in the things of troubles and trials. So we were able to see that he's superior in the compassion that he shows. And then lastly, and we'll be done, he is superior in the sacrifice that he offered. Now, so we saw in previous verses that he offered sacrifices, or the priest would offer sacrifices, but he had to do it continually. He had to do it over and over and over again. But Jesus Christ doesn't. Verse number 9 says, and being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation unto all them that obey him. Okay, so we see that Christ, the two key truths that we want to take away from this section about him being superior is that Christ did not need to offer sacrifices for himself. Okay? He never had to offer sacrifices for himself. And then also that Christ's sacrifice was once and for all. That's the two main truths that we take away from this, that he was superior in the sacrifice that he offered. So Christ did not need to offer sacrifices for himself, because we looked, the Old Testament high priest had to offer sacrifices for his own sins before he could offer it for anyone else, and it was continual. But Jesus, being sinless and being perfect and being in perfect fellowship with the Father and not needing anything, he didn't need to be cleansed. He didn't need a cleansing. He could offer the sacrifices for us, not for himself. Or he offered the sacrifice for us. Christ's sacrifice was once and for all. Like we said, repeat it, and continually over and only to cover it up, not to take it away. Jesus Christ offered himself to take away. He was the spotless Lamb of God. He was the perfect sacrifice, and that was a once and for all. Okay, but he is also the author. The reason why it's a perfect, he's superior in sacrifice, because he's the author of eternal salvation. He is the author of that eternal salvation. Christ is sinless and eternal Son of God. His perfect sacrifice makes him the author of eternal salvation, because he is the perfect sacrifice, because he is the one, he laid down his life for us, and he gave his life as a ransom for many, and he gave that, and because of that, he became the author of that eternal salvation. He made it possible for eternal salvation. His perfect sacrifice makes him that author. No Old Testament priest could ever offer salvation to anybody. What they did, that atonement that they did on a continual basis, that wasn't salvation. That was works. They were continually, it was an atonement. It was a temporary covering upon a sin. And so it was never a salvation. But Jesus Christ, he's the only one that can offer it. So what does being made perfect mean? When it says here, it says, and being made perfect. That one I wanted to look at, and being made perfect. Well, this in being made perfect, does this imply that Jesus was imperfect? Does it imply that? No, because that made perfect, means made complete. That's what that word means. It means made complete. Though his earthly sufferings, or through his earthly sufferings, Jesus was equipped for his heavenly role as a high priest. We saw that in Hebrews 2:10. But now he is able to save, he's able to keep, and he's able to strengthen his people. Paul concludes this discussion about the priesthood in verse number 10, talking about of Jesus by returning to the reality that God designated Jesus to be a priest according to the order of Melchizedek. And so this assurance of our faith is the fact that Christ himself is priest forever after this order. He says he's forever after the order of Melchizedek. Thus the assurance of our salvation and our standing before God can never be hindered. It can never be taken away. It's forever. There's another one that you can throw and put a dagger in the heart of those that believe that you can lose your salvation. He's the author of eternal salvation. And he is forever after the order of Melchizedek. It means he has secured it forever. And so therefore, you cannot lose something that's been secured forever. Okay? And then it is a priesthood that was made perfect through suffering and then the death on a cross. So the last four things that I want us to take away from this. There's four unshakable arguments that we can stand upon right now. Is that Jesus is sinless. He's unlike any other earthly priest that's ever lived. Jesus' sacrifice is once and for all. That's why I'm completely against any crucifix or anything hanging on a wall. My Jesus came down off the cross. He's not on the cross. He's not being crucified still. He's come down off of it. And so his sacrifice was once and for all. We don't need to continually to sacrifice him because he's done it once and for all. Okay? And Jesus is the author of eternal salvation. We know that because he made that perfect sacrifice. Jesus has been made complete for his high priestly role through that suffering that he faced. Okay? So in conclusion, Jesus is superior to Aaron. He's superior to any priest that ever lived or ever will live. He is superior. And that is what Paul is trying to get across to them in this section. That don't keep focusing on Aaron. Aaron was a failure in his own right. He was a high priest. Yes, he was good in many ways. But he was a failure. Look at the man. I mean, he took all the gold they brought out of Egypt and he melted it together and made a molten calf. Just because Moses didn't come down off the mountain for 40 days. And then he lied about it.
He said he just threw it in and here it came.
Yeah. He made a mold and molded it, made it, yeah. So yeah, I mean, so he was a man at his best. He was a man, okay? And so what Paul is trying to say is, why would anyone return to an inferior old law, right, when Jesus offers us a superior covenant? When he offers us something superior, why should we ever return? And that's the whole thing. And see, that's the whole thing of Hebrews, what we've been trying to see, is that Hebrews is Paul's trying to say, why you want to return to something that is full of failure? Jesus is not a failure. Stick with Jesus. And so the Hebrew believers were not growing in their faith. Immaturity made them vulnerable to going back under the old legal system. And this is why Paul will pause here. And so starting next week, we'll begin to pick up on his next section where he's going to give a warning. He's going to give encouragement to them about how he can exhort them to press on to spiritual maturity. Because as we'll see in the next section, he talks about babes, their desire that they have milk when they should be eating meat. He said you desire milk when you should be being fed with meat. And so we'll see this, and we'll be looking at that as we continue. So the rest of chapter 5 and all of chapter 6, that's all about Paul kind of re-encouragement. And then if you look at the very first verse of chapter 7, he picks back up and comes right back into being superior over Aaron. Okay? All right. I know that was a lot real quick, but I told you I was going to do it as quick as I could. And so, all right. Well, nobody. Remember, whoever's involved with the ministry tomorrow with the Woodbury, please be here at either 2 o'clock or meet at Woodbury at 2:25. To be that, sign up in the foyer for Sunday, Resurrection for lunch, and then Bee Festival is 10 to 3 at